Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack a case that is, well, it's honestly as chilling as it is totally heartbreaking. We're stepping past the sensational headlines to really examine the deep, messy, psychological factors that led a seemingly ordinary woman to commit just an unthinkable crime. I mean, this isn't just your standard true crime story. It's a really profound study of human psychology, isolation, and that terrifying breaking point of the human mind. So let's dive right into the night everything changed.
I want you to just picture this for a second. It's 11 p.m. in a super ordinary flat in Jodhpur. A neighbor hears a kitchen mixer running next door and, naturally assumes the woman living there is just making some chutney late at night. But as our source material reveals, there was absolutely no chutney inside that mixer. It was the remains of Charan, her husband, the man she had married, hoping to build a beautiful life with, the guy she envisioned having kids with. He had been dismembered. But listen, what's truly terrifying here isn't just the gruesome physical nature of the act itself. It's what investigators noted about Seema right after. Her hands weren't shaking at all. Her lips held this faint sigh, almost like she had just finished a really exhausting household chore. And the most unsettling part? There wasn't a single tear in her eyes.
And this detail right here just perfectly captures that mind-boggling detachment. At exactly 11:07 p.m., Seema sent a text message to a man named Rohit, who was her accomplice. The text was literally just 2 words, "Ho gaya." It is done. No panic, no remorse, just a totally cold, calculated update. When the police eventually uncovered this message, it really brought up the central, haunting question of this entire explainer. How does a normal, everyday person reach a level of psychological detachment so profound that they can type, "It is done," after dismantling their own spouse?
Okay, let's dive into part 1, before the breaking point, a resilient past. Because to understand the break, we absolutely have to understand who Seema was first. Growing up in a pretty humble, loving home, Seema was brilliant. I mean, she scored a solid 80% in her 10th grade exams, which was such a big deal that her father actually went around distributing sweets to the whole neighborhood. She was his absolute pride and joy. But then, her dad suffered a serious heart condition that required surgery, and the family's finances were completely wiped out overnight. Did Seema break then? No way. She showed incredible resilience. She enrolled in a cheap private college, worked literally day and night giving tuitions, and eventually took a teaching job for a really meager salary of just 12,000 rupees. And she did all of that just to buy her dad's medicines and pay for her little sister's education. She was dutiful, ambitious, and just a deeply compassionate person. So how in the world do we get from this incredibly resilient daughter to the emotionless woman sitting in an interrogation room?
That brings us to part 2. The erasure of identity. To bridge that massive gap, we need to look at the slow, suffocating process that happened behind closed doors.
So Seema met Charan, who was an accountant at her school. He seemed different, right? Like he actually listened to her. They got married and honestly for the first 6 months, life was great. They'd make breakfast together, take nice evening walks. But then, month 7 hits. Her mother-in-law arrives for what was supposed to be a short 1-week visit, but she never left. And that's when the constant verbal abuse began. Nitpicking about waking up late, the salt in the food, even walking into the kitchen wrong. When the mother-in-law explicitly declared Seema unfit for this house, Seema looked to Charan for backup, but he just looked away. Then, when money got tight, Seema offered to start tutoring again to help out. Charan flat out refused. His ego literally wouldn't let his wife earn money. He started coming home late, drinking heavily, snapping at her. By year 2, the house had just descended into total, crushing silence.
Now, we need to be clear here. This wasn't just being lonely. This was profound psychological loneliness. It's this bizarre state where she was physically living under the same roof with her husband and mother-in-law, but she was completely isolated, silenced, and totally stripped of her agency. Her husband wouldn't protect her from the abuse, and his fragile ego blocked her from the very financial independence that used to make her feel strong. She'd cry herself to sleep, wake up, and just do it all over again because she realized crying didn't change a single thing. Her entire sense of self was just erased. Which leads right into part 3, enter the savior. This is where a fatal mistake happens in a moment of extreme vulnerability.
Just looking for some tiny way to reclaim her health and sanity, Seema downloaded a fitness app and ended up meeting a gym trainer named Rohit. And we really need to walk through this because it's essentially a predator's playbook. Rohit didn't start off with some grand, sweeping, romantic gesture. No, he started with step 1, basic empathy. He noticed she seemed really quiet and just messaged her, "Are you okay?" After months of absolute neglect from her husband, those 3 little words literally brought Seema to tears. Then, step 2, he just became her sounding board. He listened to her for hours without any judgment while she unpacked all her trauma. By step 3, he's basically positioning himself as her knight in shining armor, telling her how strong she is and how she deserves so much better. He wasn't just offering an affair, you guys. He weaponized her desperate, starving need for validation. And once he knew she viewed him as her absolute only lifeline, he moves to step 4, suggesting they eliminate the source of her pain entirely.
Now we hit part 4, the point of no return. Let's look at the exact moment she's psychologically snapped. Now I know what you're probably screaming at the screen right now. Why didn't she just walk away? Why not just get a divorce? Well, here is the absolute tragedy of it all. Seema actually tried. She went to a lawyer, but the lawyer told her a contested divorce could take 2 to 3 years and get incredibly ugly. Even so, she gathered up all her courage, marched home, and told Charan to his face that she wanted out.
And this is the turning point. Charan's reaction, he didn't just say no, he actually laughed at her. And then, when he realized she was dead serious, he flew into this massive rage and delivered this devastating threat. He weaponized intimate photos she had sent him back when they were happy. He told her, point blank, that if she tried to leave, he would send those photos to her deeply traditional, debt-ridden father and to all her colleagues at the school where she taught. For a woman whose whole identity was built on being a respected teacher and her father's pride, this wasn't just a threat. This was the nuclear option.
Seriously, try to put yourself in her shoes for just a second. Her husband had essentially built a cage around her. The only legal door out was now padlocked and guarded with a threat that would completely destroy her family's honor and her only source of livelihood. The source material describes her mental state perfectly. It was like staring at a brick wall in front of her, with a massive abyss right behind her. This absolute, inescapable entrapment was the final trigger. When she went to Rohit and told him about the blackmail, he told her there was only one way out. And Seema, completely broken at this point, agreed.
Part 5, the dark execution. The really grim reality of what that psychological entrapment actually pushed her to do.
The way they executed this was just chillingly calculated. They waited for the absolute perfect window, a Wednesday night when the mother-in-law was away visiting relatives and all the close neighbors were out at a wedding. And you really have to notice the deeply disturbing juxtaposition here. That night, Seema actually cooked Charan his favorite meal, dal bati churma. He even complimented her on it, telling her she seemed to be in a really good mood. Later on, she mixed sleeping pills, which Rohit had given her, straight into Charan's tea. Once he was unconscious, Rohit slipped in through the back door. The unspeakable act happened, and then they stayed up until 2 a.m. just scrubbing the entire flat with bleach. The plan was to just wake up the next day and file a missing persons report, acting like he had just vanished.
Moving on to part 6, the interrogation, where the whole facade finally cracks.
So, Inspector Rathore, who is a 12-year veteran of the force, arrives at the flat, and immediately the distinct scent of a crime scene totally ruins their whole cover story. They bring Seema into the interrogation room, and this is where her psychological armor finally shatters. Inspector Rathore actually noted how bizarrely calm she was at first. There wasn't any fear, just this really deep, profound exhaustion. During the first hour, she stuck totally to the script. Charan just left the house. But by hour 2, the police slide some CCTV footage across the table showing Rohit's bike arriving and leaving. So she pivots, right? She says, oh, Rohit is just an old friend who stopped by. But then comes hour 4. The police lay out the undeniable forensic truth of exactly what they found inside that kitchen mixer. And that was it. That was the moment. The emotionless facade totally broke. She covered her face, started trembling uncontrollably, and gave them a full confession. Rohit was scooped up later that day at a bus stand, trying to run away with a bag of cash. Ultimately, the forensics, that CCTV footage, and those cold text messages sealed it, and they were both handed life sentences. Which brings us to our final section, Part 7, the psychological autopsy. Let's really look at the anatomy of this breaking point.
Now, the justice system rightfully sentenced Seema and Rohit to life in prison. But when Inspector Rathore was asked what the strangest part of this whole case was, he didn't talk about the gruesome crime scene. He talked about how a genuinely good person ever reached that point to begin with. He broke her psychological collapse down into 4 main pillars. First, it started with that profound domestic loneliness. Second, it was compounded by sustained emotional violence and the complete erasure of her identity. Third, the absolute breaking point was that devastating blackmail threat from the man supposed to protect her. And lastly, a manipulator who swooped in and used her extreme vulnerability to offer an incredibly deadly solution.
Inspector Rathore summed up the entire tragedy with this incredibly heavy quote. He said, "Charan shouldn't have died and Seema shouldn't have gone to jail. Both things are true."
and we really have to hold both of those truths at once. Explaining the psychology behind a crime doesn't give the criminal a free pass. Charan was a human being, he had a mother, he had friends. His death is an absolute tragedy, and what Seema did is completely unforgivable. But at the exact same time, it is equally tragic that a dedicated, loving daughter and teacher was systematically broken down until she became totally unrecognizable, even to herself.
Which leaves us with this final, honestly pretty unsettling thought to chew on. We love to think of monsters as these things that are just born in the dark, right? But sometimes they're forged right inside our own homes, built brick by brick through neglect, abuse, and sheer desperation. So I'll leave you with this. When a person is pushed entirely to the brink by the exact people they're supposed to trust, at what exact point does the victim become the villain? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the why behind the what, and I'll catch you guys next time.